votes away from the southeast corner to rural Queensland, and we support that too. Shane, come on up and say a few words. You can have a crack at this. There'll be alarms like Bob.
Thank you, and thanks Bill and also the team, and I admire their passion and their determination in pushing forward for a North Queensland state. And Bill was saying there before about the seats being abolished and then created in the southeast corner. Back in 2009, the seat of Charters Towers was abolished, the seat of Fitzroy was abolished, the seat of Tablelands was abolished. Those seats were wiped off the map, and 3 seats went into the southeast corner. And people had said to me and Robbie Catter, why did we introduce a bill to create more seats in Parliament in this last redistribution, which was 4 extra seats, so it's gone from 89 to 93. The reason why we did that is we knew that if we didn't create those extra 4 seats, then 4 seats would have gone from North Queensland and Central Queensland, wiped out, so we would have not 13 seats but 9 seats in the next redistribution, and like Bill said, and there'll be 73 in the southeast corner. That's why we did it, and that's why something has to be done, because in the next redistribution we're going to see 4 more seats wiped out of North Queensland as a result of numbers increasing in the southeast. And I'll probably just explain to you in regards to those numbers coming in the southeast corner and why that is happening, or some of the reasons why it's happening. But Robbie Catter and I, we moved the motion in the House to call on the Premier and the government to provide $250,000 to pursue and use whatever legal advice possible in basically setting up a North Queensland state. So was that supported in the House? No, it was voted down by both parties, of course. But one of the reasons why I first ran for politics, and this was the first thing, was that there was a special place in Townsville where I'd come down and try and catch a fish on the rocks, and I might get 1 mango jack, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. All of a sudden there was southern politicians were trying to stop me and a couple of other areas from fishing in these favourite fishing spots. And I said, this is absolute crap. And all of a sudden that I was finding myself not being able to fish in that spot because of some preference deal that was down in Brisbane. And nothing to do with here, it was to do with down south. And so I worked on the railway for 20 years, and I'd worked in places like Nelia, Nonda, Max Walton, Torrens Creek, out to Mount Isa. And all of a sudden, the politicians from down south closed down the railway station at Torrens Creek. Then they closed the railway station down at Nelia. Then they closed it at Nonda. Then they closed it at Max Walton. Then they started to close all these railway stations in North Queensland. And then the railway station would close down. Then the porter. Then the station master, he didn't have a job, but his children and the porter's children and the shutter's children, they sent the kids to the local school. And all of a sudden they pulled their kids out of the local school because they had to leave because they didn't have a job. The truck drivers that picked up all the goods from the train that stopped, well, their kids didn't go to school, and then the school went, then the butcher shop went. And you've seen a massive tidal wave of towns just being wiped out. And so that we saw a massive exodus of these towns wiped out, and then you saw the numbers decreased, and then they tell us that we've got to wipe out your seat now because you don't have enough numbers, and then they create that extra seat in Brisbane. So just with that, and I end up winning a seat to the Parliament, which didn't come on a silver platter, of course. Then I saw the government come in there and sell the coal component of Queensland Rail for $7 billion to overseas multinational companies. It was making $1.8 billion a year profit, and that profit was going to, like Bob was saying, to hospitals and schools and our roads, and this was in North Queensland. So they sold it. They didn't ask you, they didn't ask me if they could do it, so they sold this off. And 1.8 billion no longer exists. That asset is no longer ours. This is a North Queensland asset. That asset now is making $3.6 billion a year, and it's not going to Queensland, it's not going to schools, it's not going to hospitals. And you know what the government says? Oh, we don't have that asset anymore, so we're going to hit you more with stamp duty. We're going to hit you more with fees and charges because that asset no longer exists. Now, when they closed all these railway stations, you see the bleeding heart saying that we need to do something for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Queensland Rail was a third of Queensland Rail employees in North Queensland were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, South East Islanders. And overnight they just wiped out their jobs. And if you ever hear them get out there and say, and that's what something they knew how to fix tracks, they knew how to work on that line, they knew how to work hard, and they took them off them overnight. And you accept us to be happy about this. So just in regards to this funding, now then we saw billions of dollars go to the South Bank upgrade. We saw $7 billion, like Bob was saying, go to these tunnels. 300 million going to footbridges, and I'm just trying to remember the 75 million went to the upgrade of the Roma Street parklands. And so as you're seeing this massive amount of money, we're seeing our courthouses close, the railway stations close, the schools close, and then they say that this is good for us. This is why probably I'm determined to basically see a North Queensland state, and I'm also determined to see us have the balance of power. But as you see all this money going to the southeast corner, we went out to and talked to the residents out there at Faluga, and this intersection, and Bob had said this is probably one of the worst intersections he'd seen, going back 5-6 years ago. The residents implemented and gave a 600 strong petition to Main Roads, which went to the Minister. And right when we're seeing them talk about a $500 million aquarium over at South Bank, they had said and wrote in a letter that we acknowledge that it's a bad intersection. Just in November, an 18-year-old woman was killed. Previously, there was a person killed. Just before the woman was killed, there was a massive accident. And then a week after the woman was killed, there was another truck that rolled. And the parents are afraid to turn up to take their kids to school. And so they've continually put it forward to the government, and they keep on telling them in writing that we don't have enough funds. Now, if you could see why there is an element of passion in regards to, and then we're also hearing about the $5 billion tunnel, which has been brought up here, quite often. And so you can see why there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of frustration. Now, I introduced what they call a Fair Milk logo bill. And the reason why I introduced this, because I wanted to make it so simple that it could not be refused by both members of the House of Parliament. And I worked with the Queensland Dairy Organisation and dairy farmers, and the bill was so simple that if a processor pays a dairy farmer a sustainable price to produce that litre of milk, and that is able to sustain that dairy farmer in that region, I'm talking about region, then a Fair Milk logo would go on that milk bottle. So when you walk into the shop and you see that milk bottle that's got that logo on, you know that that milk is the one that's you're buying is paying the farmer a fair price. Both of the major parties both oppose that. We had 270 dairy farmers on the tablelands. We're now, below 50, in their 40s. There was 1,500 dairy farmers in Queensland. We're now down to 360. And just with this, the vegetation management laws, a very touchy subject. The Indigenous up the Gulf there got no jobs, and they're looking for opportunities to develop. 98% of it is still remnant vegetation. The Ainsley uplands is 95% remnant vegetation. the Gulf Plains is 90%. And continually we have the southern politicians that are making decisions on the Indigenous people up there, from developing that area. And we've got particular graziers, and this is in the North Queensland Register, where one particular grazier up in the Cape York said that we have to bring in over 5,000 tonnes of hay and all that from down south. And by doing that, we have introduced all this noxious weeds. And they have been applying the last 20 years to irrigate 400 acres, so when the cattle get weak, that they've got their own supplements there, provided for them. 10 years they've worked on, and they still won't receive a permit, and it's crap country. So, in regards to the frustrations, and when I see politicians, now I don't want to say to use that, because there is. The politicians that vote against where milk come from here, and the politicians that vote against the vegetation management also come from here, and they vote with the government or the opposition. However, they're accountable to the party, and when they're accountable to the party, what happens is, and I have a good understanding of this, and Bob knows this as well, is when they're accountable to the party, if you cross the floor and don't vote with that particular party, they'll say to you that, well, looks like your political career is over, so look for a job somewhere else, because we're not going to disendorse you if you do cross that floor. And so that puts doubt in his mind, and all of a sudden he's voting against his own constituents in North Queensland. But if we have a North Queensland state, then he's accountable not to the party, but he's accountable to the people of North Queensland. And that's why, you know, so much that I believe passionately in a North Queensland state. Now, it's been 32 years since we had a major, 32 years since we have had a major infrastructure project, and that was the Burdekin Dam. And just in regards to that, and I do remember, because we're void of infrastructure projects because we don't have the numbers, and when I was saying there before, the 13 MPs in North Queensland, and there's 73 down there in Parliament. If we didn't add 4 MPs, we would have been reduced to 10. So, in regards to the Burdekin Dam, I remember this clear as day, being a North Queenslander. At that same time in 1987, when that Burdekin Dam was completed, we had the October stock market crash. And they talked about how we possibly could go into recession and things were tough, and there was a lot of bankruptcy across, Australia. But North Queensland was booming, and you couldn't get enough work. There was too much work about. And you're flat out getting tradies because we just finished the construction of the Burdekin Dam. But I just want to tell you very quickly of the story in the Burdekin Dam. And Bob was one of the big fighters for the Burdekin Dam. And there was a powerful movement, and this probably doesn't relate, but yes, it does relate, but there was a powerful movement to construct the Burdekin Dam. And the Water Board, the Dalrymple Shire Council, the Townsville City Council, the Thurrangia Shire Council, the Burdekin growers, very strong movements. Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen flew over into Townsville. He went to Charters Towers. He talked to all residents, cane growers, you name it, all the different, supportive bodies. And he said, I will build the dam. And he said, but the scale of the operation is too big to fund that dam. And he said, we would need federal government funding. So he said, I'm prepared to put in 40% of that funding. And right at that time was when Bob Hawke overthrew Bill Hayden as opposition leader in the federal parliament. And so Bob Hawke, he flies up to Townsville and he says, I want you to vote for my 2 good people, one for the seat of Herbert and the other's Dorset. And he knew that he needed to win those seats to win government, and he believed that. And all of a sudden they said, what are you going to do about the dam? And he said, what dam? And he said, the Burdekin Dam. And he said, and they basically told him, if you don't support that dam, you will not have 2 members of parliament here in Townsville and also Dawson. So he went back and he said, I'm gone. And then he put his hand up and says, I will provide the other 60% of the funding. But those opportunities do happen, but we don't see too many of them. And so I'm really sick and tired of seeing 2 major parties all vote the same way. That impacts on our region. And the day that I don't know if I'll be alive, I hope I am. I think it's possible, but one thing I can guarantee, that it's much better than having members of parliament representing Brisbane than having members of parliament representing the people here in North Queensland. So I just want to stay with you, very passionate about it, and determined to see an outcome here, and want to continue to fight for rural and regional Queensland, particularly North Queensland. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Shane.